Welcome. This is Triaging Time, and I'm your host, Dan Luna. Today's guest is Derrick Doehler, and we're at his farm in Tennessee. You can hear the fish jumping in the background. Derrick is a retired fire chief from San Gabriel Fire Department. He started out as an auxiliary volunteer. From there, he put himself through Paramedic School and was hired as the first Firefighter Paramedic for San Gabriel. He held ranks such as acting engineer, fire captain, Battalion Chief, Division Chief, Deputy Chief, and Fire Chief. He is now retired after 22 and a half years on the department. Derrick, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So diving right into things like I like doing, life, leadership, volatility, and trauma. If we only had a few minutes with you today, what advice with your years of experience would you share with us?
That one thing that's overlooked a lot in the EMS service right now, the fire service, and I think through police, they're just starting to break the barrier of mental health. And mental health is a big thing. I've had my own run-in with depression and mental health, and by me being open and honest about my problems with it, it's paved the way for other people that have had similar situations or even worse situations than I had, that they were able to come to me and I was able to at least help facilitate them and get them pointed in the right direction. We're talking about people's careers on the line, and their mental well-being, and it affects not only your work life but your home life. It affects your entire life, and I think a lot of that is overlooked in a pretty much male-dominated society, or not society but a work group. There's a lot of testosterone flying around, and nobody wants to admit when they're having a problem or when they're down and out, especially in a fire station, because that leaves you vulnerable to more attacks. We kind of prey on the weak, even though we're friends. You prey on the weak, and when that happens, somebody might be truly at their down moment, and we need to do a better job of taking care of each other during those times.
So what thoughts would you have for those who are in a department now? Some things that were you able to use? Was there tactics that you used while you're in the department as a fire chief with your peers?
Well, the first place where I noticed it was my wife actually came to me and said, it had a lot to do, a lot of things tying in. It was years. Trauma never bothered me. I've seen a lot of trauma, experienced a lot of trauma firsthand, and it never had an effect on me until we were pregnant with our first child. And once we were starting to bring another life into this world, that's where it dawned on me that that life, all these lives that I've seen lost, now I have a child on the way. What if one of those things happens to that child? While we were pregnant, 9/11 happened. And 9/11 obviously happened in September. My daughter was born in April, and probably by May, the beginning of May, end of May, a month and a half into it, my wife, who was working 12-hour shifts, she'd come home at 9 o'clock at night, and I was literally crying over my daughter's bed. And the part that was affecting me the most was the phone calls from people at the top of the towers, calling their dad, calling their mom. Something happened at work. There's smoke in the building. I can't get out. They're telling us to stay here. And I kept thinking, what am I doing bringing a human into this world that we're now living in? And I don't want to ever get that phone call. And it was probably 2 or 3 weeks of my wife coming home and me crying over my daughter's crib. And one morning she said, "Hey, we got to talk." And of course, in complete denial, talk about what? And she pointed out, this isn't normal. took a look at myself, what I was doing. Yeah, that's not normal. Yeah, and she said, you need to go get some help. So I did. And through our employer, we had an EAP program, an employee action program, employee EAP, either way. And you call EAP and they hook you up with a counselor of what you need, and they give you 3 or 4 sessions free. And I went and talked to a lady, and from the moment I walked in to talk to this lady, she was older. She was older than I was. She was probably in her 60s, mid 60s. And I thought, when I first sat down with her, what's this lady going to know about my life?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not the first person that she'd have a conversation with about this. And she was spot on. Everything she said, from the minute we sat down till the hour later when I left, she was spot on. She had great advice. I actually ended up having to go on medication. And she saved my life. She saved my life. She saved my marriage. She changed my life just with the things she said and the things that she suggested to me.
Do you mind sharing kind of where you were at in the fire department at that time?
At the time, I was a firefighter, still firefighter paramedic. I was working on the ambulance, in between the ambulance and the engine.
Okay.
I was probably still an acting engineer, but
So a couple years on the force at this point?
I had been on 6 years, 5 or 6 years.
5 or 6 years. Okay.
At that point.
If you're okay, do you mind sharing some of the 9/11 experience?
Sure. For us, from the time it happened or the time in New York?
Your time in New York.
Okay, for our time in New York, our city was the first to do a Fill the Boot in LA County. And we raised over $155,000 in 3 days just standing on a corner in our we're a 2-station department. And for us to raise that much money in that amount of time was unbelievable. It really was. And one of the other guys at the station had organized this whole thing and put it on. And a month later, in October, we went out to basically attend funerals, and we were hooked up through the IAFF, the International Association of Firefighters.
You went out to New York.
We went out to New York. There were 6 of us that went out, 5 of us from San Gabriel and a 6th person from a department up in the Bay Area. And we took the check with us and we handed it over to the Widow and Orphan Fund at one of the stations. They hooked us up with the Duane Street Station, 100 Duane Street Station in Midtown Manhattan. It was a Truck 1, Engine 7 engine. And we stayed with them for 3-4 days. We stayed at a hotel, but they took us around. They drove us around. They hosted us, basically. The Twin Towers was their first in, and they're known as the Lucky 7 now because they didn't have anybody die on their engine out of their station, even though they were first in Manhattan. And our first funeral that we went to was a guy that had been he was on the floor 2 or 3 days out of the academy, and his name was Richard Allen. And he was a big driving force of mine. Somebody that I identified with because I'd only been on a few years, and here this guy was a new guy and didn't even get to have a career. And he was from Queens, New York, from Rockaway Beach, and we went out to his funeral. It was the first one, and the street was lined with I don't even know how many hundreds, a couple thousand people just to support this brand new guy. We made our way through Ground Zero on the way back to Manhattan that day. And that afternoon we went to Ricky, I can't think of his name now. His last name is Brown. I can't think of his first name. But he was the highest decorated person on the New York Fire Department and the highest decorated veteran on the New York Fire Department at the time. And so in one day, we went from a brand new boot to the most decorated, probably one of the most famous people in the New York Fire Department at the time, to their funerals all in one day. And that had a profound effect on me. To stand in Fifth Avenue with the guys from my station, people that I work side by side with, who I put my life in their hands when we're working, and you're standing in Fifth Avenue and you You don't hear there's not a single car. It's shut down, all for this funeral procession to go by. That's amazing. I mean, it's powerful. It had a real impact on me and the guys I was with.
So when you got home from that, is that when your wife really started to notice a change, or was it even prior to that?
No, it was after. It was after my
Okay.
daughter was born, and it wasn't until April.
Okay.
So we got home. We were out there for 4 days, and we got home on a Sunday night, and Monday morning there was a crash. An engine fell off a plane, and a plane crashed in Rockaway Beach where we were. And right after Richie Allen's funeral, I went and we were looking for family members. And I remember my buddy Brian says, "Hey, how do you know who's a family member?" I said, "Whoever's getting hugged the most is going to be a family member.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going to go give our condolences." Well, we found his mom. His mom was sitting there holding his helmet, or a helmet they had given her. And so we went over and gave our condolences to her. Well, here she is on CNN talking about the plane that crashed and a store that she owns, and how she was right outside the church where we were just days before. Had that plane crashed during the funeral, it would have killed as many, if not more, firemen than 9/11 did. Because we were right there just a couple days before. So that was another thing. Oh my gosh, we just escaped death by having a funeral 5-6 days before this plane crashed. So as we go forward, a movie came out in March about 9/11, and it had to do with 2 French film producers that were following a rookie fireman.
Mm-hmm.
And they were at the station on Duane Street where we were, and that's how humble these guys were, is they didn't even mention this to us while we were there. And all of a sudden they start showing the station, and we're seeing familiar faces, the same guys that took us to funerals, that made us dinner, the same we were at the same station with these guys, and going through the entire process of the first building, the first plane into the first building, and the building collapsing. They were there to film all this stuff. So that was pretty impactful to me. But like I said, it wasn't until my daughter was born and I started seeing and holding this little human. God, I don't want her calling me from a building that's going to collapse, and it's the last. And I missed the phone call. That's terrible. And that just messed with my mind. And that was the first time that trauma, and I was in a hole that I didn't even know I was in. I always say I was in a 3-foot hole that I couldn't even jump out of, because I'm right there. I'm still going to work. I'm fine until I put my daughter down. I see her sleeping at night, and it just rocked my world.
Are you okay with sharing some of the information or the thoughts from the counselor that you worked with?
Sure. One of the biggest things, and I've used this to help other people, is within the first 5 minutes, she had asked me, "How long's this been going on?" And I said, "It's been going on about 3 weeks, or it had gone on 3 weeks before my wife talked to me, but before I got to a counselor, it was just over a month." And I said, "Oh, it's been a month and a half." And she told me right there, "Oh, you're gonna have to go on medication." And I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a pretty big statement to make, and only meeting me in 5 minutes. But her point, her training tells her that if you've done this for 30 days or more, it's a habit. And that's why, just like dieting or working out, they tell you to do it every day for 30 days. You quit drinking in Alcoholics Anonymous, they tell you to go your first 30 days, most important, because you make it a habit of doing things for 30 days. If it's over that, it's a habit, and it's hard to break that habit with just counseling.
Yeah.
Well, I look at the world as with a lot of giving us lemons, and I make lemonade out of it. My glass is always half full. I can find humor in just about anything, including a funeral, just about anything. And when you talked about mental health and you talked about crazy people or depression or anything else, I always looked at them as people that were weak. And I told her, I can't go on medication. I can't do that. And she asked, why not? And I said, because I make fun of people on medication. I can't, that's not me. I'm not there. She said, yes, you are. And she was right, I was. And in looking back at it, so I started taking a medication called fluoxetine. And looking back at it, there was just I was very volatile human being. Things would set me off. I was angry at the drop of a hat. And this medication helped calm all that. And it brought things a little more into focus for me. And I wasn't so quick to fly off the handle where I had been pretty much from 20 to 30, 35 years old.
Did your peers notice a difference?
People, I would say a few did, but not many. A few may have, but not many.
Was it anything that you talked about?
I didn't talk about it until after I'd promoted to captain, because at that time I still was under the impression that you can't have anything wrong with you if you're ever going to promote. And that's not the case. You can have things wrong with you. It's what you do with it and how you treat it. And if you take care of it and you're aware of it, I'd promote anybody as long as they're aware of it and they're doing something about it. But young firefighters, people that are looking to promote, they think that things like that would hold them back from promotion, I think. And I know I did. I for sure did. And so I didn't talk about it until I was a captain. And I was able to identify other people that had problems that I could call them in and say, hey, you okay? And just talk to them. And when you call a grown man into your office and you ask them, hey, are you okay? And they say, yeah, I'm fine. And you delve deeper into it and you say, no, because here's what I see and I'm concerned about you. And you start talking to them and that grown man breaks down crying in front of you. Chances are they're holding on to quite a bag of trauma that they need to get out, that they need to work on. And I've had 3 people that I've helped with that I have brought them in and identified, that I was able to identify through my own experience, you know what, I need to look out for this guy and I want to make sure that he's taken care of. One guy's mom died. Another guy, he let his paramedic license lapse, and he had been a paramedic for over 30 years. Well, he knows when his license is due, and something's wrong there for him to let that lapse. And the third guy was going through a divorce.
What I've noticed kind of in the realm that I came from was typically the first thing is just to scold, judge, or discipline. Hey, you messed up, you let that lapse. And that's almost always the initial answer, is some form of discipline. You messed up. Hey, are you aware of this mess up? Hey, if you let it happen again, we now need to move on to something else. So I think what you just shared, and it took me kind of the same thing. I had to go through multiple things to then realize, and then to see it in others, and to identify it, to hey man, something else is going on here, because you're out of character, right? So character is this pattern that you've established, and now you're doing this thing that doesn't make sense at all. Is that kind of the same thing what you saw?
I'll tell you exactly what I saw. This came out in a inspection from the county. The county audits us every year. And in this audit, they said, yeah, one of your guys, his paramedic license has been lapsed for 8 months. 8 months? Who is it? And they told me, and I said, no way. You got the wrong guy. I walked out of the room. I called him on my phone. I said, hey, they're telling me that your license expired. What's going on here? And he just folded. I mean, absolutely folded. Yeah, you do it. And he told me, and he was polite about it, but he said, you do what you need to do. I was a deputy chief at the time. And he said, you do what you need to do. But yeah, that's exactly what's going on. And I said, what do you mean do what I need to do? He says, you got to fire me. I don't care anymore. He says, I'll be honest with you. I'm one step away from putting a gun in my mouth. I said, you need to be in my office tomorrow morning. We're going to have a talk. And I'm not firing you as of right now. I don't know what's going to happen, but that's not where I want this to go. And we're talking about a good, strong worker, a guy that you never have problems with. And he showed up the next morning in pretty much the same mode, and we had a big, long talk. I said, close the door, and we're talking. And I gave him where I had come from and what I had been through. And he took a look at that as, wow, if it can happen to you, it can happen to me. And he took that and ran with it. And I got updates from him regularly. He started seeing a counselor. He got on medication. He did the whole route. The fire chief at the time wanted to fire him. And I told him, absolutely, we cannot fire this guy. Why am I going to fire a guy that I know just needs to be fixed? And I have to replace that with a guy that I know nothing about. And I've got to promote somebody else that I know nothing about or has to prove himself. This guy's a proven person in his position. I want to hang on to that. I want to fix that. I don't want to throw it away. It's not worth throwing away. We have time, we have money, and he's a person. Let's work on that. And that's what was important to me. And as the deputy chief, when it came time to discipline him, he asked me to call the attorney. Our attorney wrote out our disciplines for us. And I said, what do you want me to do? We're going to fire him, or are you going to suspend him or demote him? And he said, have him write up one of each. So I had no idea what we were going into, but I had to sit in there when he did it, and he threw that firing out at him. I was like, you're out of your mind. I broke down in tears. I wanted nothing to do with that. And he went and looked at his file after he had given him the discipline, because this chief, where he had come from, that he wasn't allowed to look at personnel files when they gave discipline. In our city, we could. And I remember he called me. He said, this guy's a Boy Scout. I can't fire him. That's what I told you. What do you think I had been telling you? And so he ended up not getting fired. He got demoted. And when I finally got promoted to fire chief, he's the first one I promoted back into his position, because he's just a stellar guy. He's a really good guy.
That's another pattern that I've noticed in having a lot of these conversations is somebody's struggling and we go straight to the technical component. And so often as we distinguish between managers and leaders, one's kind of, if you will, the technical means, and the other one's more the human aspect. And we talk about leadership, and there's a lot of leadership curriculum and information out there. Leadership's hard. It's a lot of work, especially when you're busy, you have your work to do, and then you have people underneath you that you're also trying to take care of. So these patterns that I've seen is so often leaders are so overworked. They have so much going on already that now they have to actually be a leader, take care of one of their teammates, which takes additional time, additional energy. And I've seen that pattern of like, hey man, if you're not carrying your weight, it's time for you to go. Instead of one, having that conversation, recognizing that that conversation needs to take place. Hey, there's something going on. And then taking the time and energy to continue to help that individual. So often it's like, oh, they're weak, or they're going through a divorce, or they saw something they can't get back. They're stuck somewhere. Oh, they're in counseling, or now they do something else. Maybe there's a drinking incident, or there's some other incident that adds on to that. And now it's like, hey, it's discipline time.
Right.
And then the individual gets fired, and then that continues their spiral, because now they just got fired. They just lost their job. So now there's more weight stacked on them. And then you look at some of these guys that go to the lengths of committing suicide, or drinking heavily. So what started in the workplace, or what started while they were in the workplace, and that's why we're having this conversation, because it is so important for leaders to hear this, to take that pause, and to self-assess. And like, hey, am I able to recognize these things? And if I am, what am I doing about it? And how do I organize that? So after teasing out those kind of two patterns for you, once again, in a key leadership position, what are some tips or advice that you have for leaders out there that deal in this realm of volatility?
Part of what you talked about, we were a two-station department. We're a smaller department. So we have that ability and that flexibility to do it. Mm-hmm. If you're with Los Angeles County, LA City, New York, big city, and you have numerous discipline cases going on, they are here's the crime, here's the punishment, boom. They have to be, because they are so big. They don't have the time to take into account. Hopefully that would be done during an investigation by whoever's doing the investigation to find out about that employee. But bigger departments, they're the ones that tend not to have the time to do that, or the resources to, I don't want to use the word coddle somebody, but to find out what's going on. They just know you broke a rule, you're going to pay the price for it. So for me, I was fortunate enough to be able to have the ability to do that, to take the time to bring them in, to talk to them and find out what's going on. The advice that I would tell anybody as to why I do that and why it's important to me to take the time to do that, again, the city has invested money in training you. The city, the department, the agency, whatever it is, has taken time to even hire. Hiring's expensive. When you hire a firefighter and you're outfitting them with equipment and uniforms and badges and everything, it costs up background investigations, everything. It all adds up. You're making an investment in somebody, you need that return. So this guy that this happened to with the license, we had gotten our return on him long ago. He's the guy that would give his life to help the department. He really would. And for this new chief that had come in, stepped in to discount that without taking into account what I had said, it's shameful. It really is. Because now you're just throwing away your investment. Yeah. And I invest in people. When I hire somebody, there's guys that I was lucky enough to hire that I brought in, and I think about them all the time. I wonder how they're doing. I wonder if they're going to be taking the next exam. I wonder if they're working out in the department. You know, the last thing you want to hear is, "Oh, that guy you hired, geez, we can't stand working with him." Oh, that would be a bummer. But I'm invested in all of them. Always will be. I'm always curious as to what's going on with them, who's doing what.
That's great. If you could give advice to your younger self, so if you could travel back in time and be that young volunteer, that auxiliary volunteer, that young man, what advice would you give that young man?
Slow down a little bit. And I'm not talking about your work ethic. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about rushing life. Just slow down. You've got plenty of time. Mm-hmm. My other advice would be to keep doing what you're doing. I was told that numerous times. I had a battalion chief when I was a firefighter, and one of his words to me was, "You're the future of this department." And that resonated with me. That was wow. I mean, it felt good. So to compliment people, listen to those compliments, when you're at the top, give lots of compliments. But to tell myself would be to keep doing what you're doing, because I took a lot of personal inventory to my education, to my training, to everything I was doing. I didn't get my bachelor's degree till I was 42 years old. Mm-hmm. I'm writing papers that I should have been doing at 19, 20 years old for college with a baby, mm-hmm. and a baby Bjorn on my, typing away. Start your education earlier, I guess, would be another thing I'd tell myself. But I had great friends. I had a guy that I helped get hired who we are still the best of friends to this day, and he always had an eye for what the right things to do. to go get our bachelor's degree, to go get our chief officer cert, our fire officer cert, to go get these certifications, to go get this training, to go get that training. And I was lucky enough to be there and to tag along with him, even when I didn't want to. I didn't want to get into this bachelor's program because I didn't think I ever, which is another thing if you want to talk about, is about learning disabilities. I was diagnosed with learning disability after I'd gotten hired. And I thought, no, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to do this because of this learning disability. That's can't be any further from the truth. There are more things to help people with learning disabilities now than ever before. I mean, there's people serious, worse than mine, getting their masters, getting all kinds of educations. There are so many things out there to help you. You need to press on, get your education. Anybody can get an education now. Does that mean that everybody needs an education? No. There are some people that work with their hands better than they work with their mind. I'm one of those people. I think I work better with my hands. I have a strong back, and a somewhat strong mind. I've got friends, boy, they're just the most cerebral people in the world, but they hate going out and digging a ditch. And I don't mind digging the ditch. I don't mind washing the fire engine, and they can't stand that stuff. And so those are the things I'd tell myself is just continue to do what you're doing, keep on with your education, keep following the people. I followed good people. I listened to good people. A lot of people have advice, and if you can't filter through what's right and what's wrong, that's going to hold you back. And I don't even know how to tell somebody how to filter advice. But everybody has advice. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. I was lucky enough to filter out and listen to the good advice.
So for 22 and a half years on the department, being around, fires and crashes and heart attacks and that volatile environment, what advice would you give to your younger self on how to process everything? How to, hey, do this before you go home and you see your wife, or, hey, spend more time in nature. Go do these things. What advice would you give yourself on just emotionally processing these things, or self-care, if you will?
When I got hired, there was zero education for dying, to deal with death, to deal with trauma. So I laughed it off. Everything, like I said, everything just became, we kind of laughed about things, and you got back to the station and maybe you were talking about it to somebody, but you laughed it off, and we laughed everything off, and we kind of, yeah, that's terrible. That was it. If I could go back and help somebody with that now, our department, there was a Dr. Graves that used to come out, and he would actually do stress debriefings with us. There are plenty of places that offer assistance for hire, or offer maybe even voluntary students that are working on their masters or something that can come out and help with stress debriefings. They are so important to do. There was an air crash in Cerritos years ago, and I can't remember what the numbers were, but out of all the fire, police, and everybody that responded to it, we're talking about body parts on people's front doors and stuff in the middle of the road. I think there were 18 or 19 fire and police that got out of the profession because of the trauma they suffered at that one call, at that one air crash. Not right away, but over the years. And there needs to be, that's a complete failure. There needs to be something in place more than that. And that's what stress debriefing started to do and help with. You need to get them done right away. We were at the point where when we did stress debriefings, we called in, we had notified the ER where we took the patient that we were doing it, and we had nurses and staff from the hospital come down and do stress debriefings with us. So that's a big part. Find somebody, a professional that can come in and help with you. If I had a problem one day, I could come to you and I could talk to you and you'd be like, geez, that sucks. That person was laid out, ground into the ground, whatever it was. That's not help. That's venting from me to you, but it's not help. You're not the professional. You don't know the cycles to help draw out that poison that's in you from that trauma. And that's what a professional will help you do.
Can you describe that stress debriefing a little bit? Like what that looks like?
I'll be honest, I haven't had one in a long time, but basically we gathered in a circle. We had a few firefighters from other departments that would come in with Dr. Graves, and we would each just get to talk about what we saw and what bothered us and how we felt about it. So, again, grown men breaking down crying over what they saw, what they did, what they experienced. I saw new guys that were auxiliaries that were volunteering. They would break down and cry. Well, they're the most vulnerable, in my opinion, because they haven't seen this and it's already bothering you. You really need to take care of it, because you're going to have a long career of this. And in order to have a long career of this, you need to know how to deal with this and process it. So we would sit in there, and basically it was just hashing out everything that we went over. And it was kind of dumping it, if you could imagine, dumping everything that you saw and experienced and went through, and dumping it in that room. And we had all agreed upon ahead of time that that's where this is going to stay, and we're going to leave this here. And if it comes back into us, that we all agreed that we would get help with it if we couldn't get rid of it. But the whole point of it was to dump it in that room as a collective, everybody that was involved, as a team, we're going to get rid of this. And it worked. It was a pretty positive experience.
Wow.
Crazy, I know.
Did you have anything that you noticed that personally worked for you? Like, hey, this was my thing that worked for me.
As far as
processing it. You know, hey, I couldn't do this thing. Like, hey, I just left and I just saw a car crash, and, you know, there's a little kid and the mom in the car.
I called EAP 5 times after my first bout with depression.
Okay.
That's my answer to that. Get help. Don't wait for it. If you're yelling at your wife or you're mad, mine was a week. Mine would always take a week. I would have a problem on Monday, or not a problem, but I would go on a bad call, or I would experience whatever on a Monday. By the next Sunday or Monday, I'd be snapping at my wife. I always took it out on my wife, because you always hurt the ones you love. I didn't know how to communicate with her and to be able to talk to her about it, because she didn't quite understand it, but I'm around her the most. So she was the one that I was always releasing this week of pent-up trauma on. And after a week, she would just pull me aside and say, you're being an asshole, and something's wrong with you. And after 2 or 3 of those, I recognized that this is what I'm doing. Here's my pattern. I hold on to it for a week, and then I just dump on the first person that comes along. And that's not okay. Whether it was somebody at work, but it was usually my wife. And to dump on that person. Well, after 2 or 3 of those, I recognized it. I sat her down and we had a talk about what I'm doing and about what was going on, so she could recognize it. And instead of her just thinking, you're being an ass, it became, hey, you just blew up at me today. Something going on, and she knew to ask. I'd look back, yeah, you know what? I had this issue, we had this problem, and I see what you're saying. I got to call somebody, and I would go get help, outside professional help. Again, talking to your friends and talking to your buddies, even talking to your wife sometimes. It's it's somebody to talk to, but it's not an emotional dump. It's not a trauma getting rid of it. You need to be able to process that and deal with it, and professional people can help walk you through that.
That's awesome. Thank you, Derrick. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Do you have any questions for me?
I don't. At this time, I don't. I am honored to have you ask me to do this. I am honored to open up my life and the things that have happened with me here, and I'm hoping that things that I've done to be able to help your listeners, to be able to help the people that are watching, and hopefully this will help somebody else. There's a lot of good people out there. I know every one of the men at the San Gabriel Fire Department, including My executive secretary, if I forget her, she's going to let me know about it. They're out there doing incredible work, and they're putting in long hours, especially now with the COVID-19 that's going on. And they're out there helping people that complete strangers every day. And all law enforcement and fire EMS personnel are doing it. And I can't be prouder to have been a part of those people.
Awesome.
So thank you for having me out here.
Thank you. Do you have any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Don't be afraid. Yeah, I'm sure there's people that are going to watch this that know me, and they're going to joke about it, and they're going to laugh about it, which is fine. I don't mind being laughed at. That's what keeps us sane sometimes. But think about what I said. Think about some of the things that have happened. Keep them in the back. Just file that. And when you notice it in somebody else, take the time. Take the time in your good people, the good people in your department, the good people in your platoon, the good people wherever you have. They're your investment. Take care of them. Hold on to them strong, like your brother. And we all call each other brother and sister, but do we treat each other that way? Hang on to them. Work with them. Help them out. See what you can do to help them out.
Oh, today was powerful. Thank you, Derrick. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Some things that I heard in there was just really big on noticing. So noticing those patterns within yourself, having either a peer or spouse to help you notice those patterns, and then use your resources. You know, use those counselors that are available to you, or go out and get one yourself if they're not available to you. Really recognizing those patterns, recognizing ways to process that, and then if you are a leader, look for those folks who may need that help. Bring them in, talk to them, and take care of your people. Don't just give lip service. Actually take care of them. Put some time and energy into it. Did I hit some highlights in there?
That is a lot of it, but if you really suspect something's wrong, don't just take an okay, I'm okay for an answer. Tell them why you think they're not okay, and call them out on it. Because when you call them out on it, that a lot of people have that barrier up, but if you drop that barrier down, oh, you're seeing through my barrier? Man, they just break right down because they want to get it out too. Yeah. They want help. Everybody wants to be healthy, mentally healthy. Got to get that out. Yeah. Don't take I'm okay for an answer. Get out there and really, really show them that you're interested in them. And if you think they're putting up a front, cut through their barrier, cut through their crap, and dig in deep with them.
Thanks, Derrick. Take care of your people. If you know anyone that would benefit from this video, please share it with them. And of course, like, subscribe, comment. It really helps out a lot. Remember, you don't manage time, you manage yourself, and leadership starts with you. Thanks, guys.